I'd like to begin our meeting for the select board meeting for Monday, March 2nd. Tonight, we are going to quickly go downstairs and do an interview, and then we'll be back at 7 o'clock. At that time, I will introduce the board, but we'll be back in a few minutes. Thanks. bring us back to the Select Board meeting for March 2nd. And I'm going to introduce myself and the board. I'm Kathy Corson. I'm the chair of the Select Board. Ann Sermon's on my right. And my last meeting is tonight. Thank you, Ann, for your service.
Thank you.
Molly Cowan is our vice chair. Nico Papin-Kostanis is our clerk.
Good evening.
Julie Gilman,
Good evening.
select woman, and then Rustine is our town manager, and Joanna Bartel is our recording secretary. I'm going to take the liberty tonight to move part of our agenda up, as we have our town council here, and in the town's best interest, we would like to address the discussion and action point in 7B, which is healthy climate ordinance that we have been asked to discuss. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, because we, as a board, we had made our decision early on that we're not going to sign the ordinance. And we have discussed it with town council, but I would like the people that asked me to put this on the agenda, if they would like to come up and speak, please feel free.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am Maura Fay, 13 Forest Street. I had asked for us to be able to be on the agenda tonight so that we could just come back to the board and sort of revisit the Right to a Healthy Climate ordinance and how the town may choose to act upon it. We had spoken to the board, I guess, back in, I want to say December. We had the opportunity to meet with a couple of board members and Mr. Dean as a smaller group, I guess early in January. At which point we were asked to bring some additional information by an attorney who we had consulted, who works for the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Her name is Kira Kelly, and she's here tonight. So if we do have additional questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer them. And so what we were asking for was for the town to spell out how they will be implementing this in the town boards and procedures. We're aware that the select board has chosen not to sign the ordinance, but that does not make it invalid. It is still a valid ordinance. It has been passed by Democratic town vote last March. And so as such, the town boards need to be using this in their decision-making. And we were hoping to have a conversation about how that can work. I do have the letter from Attorney Kelly here. If I could read it into the record, I think that would be helpful.
And it is in our packet, I believe.
Yes, I think so.
Go ahead.
Okay.
If you'd like to.
The letter is dated January 13th, 2020. It says, Dear Exeter Select Board, I am writing to confirm a legal question posed at the January 2nd, 2020 meeting between 3 members of Citizen Action for Exeter's Environment, Ms. Sanborn of the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, Mr. Dean, Mr. Papakonstantis, Ms. Corson, and myself. At this meeting, I noted that the Right to a Healthy Climate ordinance is binding, valid, and enforceable according to its stated terms immediately upon enactment. Article 30 on the March 12, 2019 town meeting ballot asked, shall the town of Exeter adopt the Right to a Healthy Climate ordinance? The ballot question for this article concluded that once adopted at town meeting, the ordinance is effective immediately. For any acts taken at a New Hampshire town meeting to be valid, the subject matter of the business shall be distinctly stated in the warrant, and nothing done at any meeting except the election of any town officer required by law to be made at such meeting shall be valid unless the subject thereof is so stated. That's NHRSA 39:2. The March 2019 town meeting warrant described the ordinance and included the text of the proposed law in its entirety, satisfying the RSA's sole validity requirement for this action, aside from the petitioning requirements in New Hampshire RSA 39:3, which in this instance are not in dispute. The voters declared through the plain text of the ballot question that they intended to adopt the ordinance as a binding enforceable law. The item is titled an ordinance, which is traditionally binding, as opposed to a resolution, which citizens and government officials commonly understand to be an emphatic statement with no legal effect. See, for example, the resolution in Article 28 of the March 2019 ballot. Similarly, the statement in the ballot question indicating that the ordinance is to take immediate effect would be illogical for a ballot item that created no legal consequences through its adoption. The plain text of the ordinance declares itself to be a binding law that enshrines legally enforceable rights. All laws are presumed to be valid until and unless they are overturned through a judicial opinion. Ordinances are no exception to this well-known legal principle. Quote, "We presume that the challenged ordinance is valid and require the challenger to prove otherwise," end quote. Community Resources for Justice, Inc. v. City of Manchester, 154 NH 748, 756-57, a decision from 2007. Citing Verizon v. New England v. City of Rochester. An ordinance stands legitimate and in full effect without an order from a court with jurisdiction over the enacting municipality. No such order has overturned the right to a healthy climate ordinance. Thank you for your attention to this matter and anticipated actions to further your commitment to serving your constituents. I appreciate this opportunity to contribute to your work. Best regards, Kira Kelly.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to speak to it?
I don't know that there is.
Okay. I don't know if we could have our town council give us a little bit of his thoughts on this. And we have discussed this as a board on more than a few occasions. And I don't know if, Walter, you could respond to the letter and...
Although I wish you had given me a heads up before.
I'm sorry. I didn't know how it was going to be.
Just trying to figure out where to start.
Maybe you could
I think-
respond to the ordinance as a whole and why it is in our best interest not to put this into our ordinance.
Well, the only thing of any weight that the speaker just said is that, yes, this thing that was voted on had a title called an ordinance. But an ordinance that is supposed to be regulatory has to have content that purports to be regulatory. This statement that goes on for 3 pages doesn't have that content. There is nothing regulatory in what was voted on by the townspeople. There is, and I understand there's also been pressure on one or more board members that the Board of Selectmen ought to create some Uber board or Uber regulatory body to oversee the planning board and the ZBA. Where is that in the content of this? It doesn't exist, and even if it did, the structure of government in the state and even at the federal level is that this town has only the authority that is granted to it by the legislative bodies that are superior to it, the state legislature and the federal legislature. Absent authority delegated by those bodies, this town doesn't have the authority to act, go off on its own and create different things. And it's fascinating that people would like this ordinance to be enacted, and in taking steps to enforce this ordinance against the rights of individual property owners, the town is putting itself on the hook because you're interfering with property rights. Now, that's fine if you have the legal authority to do it. But as this piece of paper acknowledges in two different locations, the town doesn't have that. Both on about a third of the way down the second page and then in section 2 on the third page, it pretty clearly says that we acknowledge that there has to be significant constitutional changes at the state and federal level before we can get what we want. And yet they're here trying to push you to interfere with property rights without legal authority. And that is one of many reasons that my recommendation to this board is that it should do nothing to enforce this ordinance in any way. Thank you.
Thank you. So basically what you're saying, there's no regulatory substance to this article, which we have said on a more than one occasion, and that in order to do this, there would be needed to be a change in the federal and the state constitution.
Yes. Yes, because there's no present authority to do this.
Right.
I mean, there are other problems here that are significant illegalities. One being that it tries to pretend that the voters of Exeter have the authority to change law, decisional law decided by the U.S. Supreme Court on whether a corporation is entitled to be a person. Frankly, personally, I don't like that decision, but it is the law, and we can't change that just by voting on something at the annual town meeting. Similarly, there has been created over probably 100 years of state and federal Supreme Court law, decisional law, doctrine called preemption, where certain areas are so thoroughly regulated by either the state, at the state level or the federal level, that towns do not have the authority, are preempted from having the authority to make up their own regulations. But this so-called ordinance, again, pretends that the voters of Exeter, by taking one vote, can change that completely. I mean, that's, you know, it doesn't accomplish anything to characterize that, but it just can't be done. It also treats corporations, it seeks to condemn, and my problem here is that there's very little definition or standards. There are no standards at all contained in this, and there's very little definition as to what it is that should be prohibited, and there's not even prohibitory language. But it is clear that there are certain land use practices, whether they be dumping hazardous waste, which we all would be against, or the use of fertilizers, which some people don't care for, or things like that, that the writers of this ordinance aren't happy about. But the strange thing, and the thing that's one of the many things that's unconstitutional about this, is that it only prohibits those activities if they're performed by a corporation a business, some other business entity, in the words of the ordinance, or a government. If an individual does these very same actions, I guess it's okay with them. And for that reason alone, it would be found to be violative of equal protection provisions. I've said enough.
Thank you. Does anybody care to comment? Okay, go ahead.
I guess I would like to hear a little bit more about from the proponents of the rights-based ordinance, where they see it fitting in with town law, and how do we implement it?
Thank you. You know, there were a couple of points that I would like to speak to. We also have Michelle Sanborn here from CELDIF and Kira Kelly, who I think can clarify a couple of points as well. I think there's been some confusion that we're advocating for the creation of, as Mr. Mitchell said, an Uber board of some type. That has not ever been a statement from anybody that I'm aware of. But what we were asking for was for the town as a whole to create policies and procedures through the select board, through the planning board, through the existing boards that would incorporate the principles of this ordinance in their decision-making. So nobody has ever asked for a separate board to be created or to have some kind of oversight. The idea is that this gets used by existing decision-making boards.
But I asked that question, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, whenever, longer ago. But where in the process? We have the technical review committee, there's already a process. And it appeared that whatever issue was going to be addressed, that it could be sort of swooped in at any time. And I don't think what's in your ordinance, we shouldn't even call it an ordinance because it isn't, it's whatever. It isn't even defined well enough that anyone would even be able to do it. So I guess that's part of my question is, what exactly is trying to be accomplished here? And just because an ordinance was passed, there has to be a whole lot more content or depth to it for us
And
to
that's
even be able to.
exactly why we came to the board a few months ago to say, we would like to have this conversation about how it gets incorporated into town decision-making processes. We would like to be able to sit down with board members, with planning board, and to say, here is where in your process it could work. Let's talk about what would make sense for this board. And instead, we were invited to a meeting where we were told that the town considered this ordinance invalid. So we tried to have that conversation and would love to continue to have that conversation, but we were not given the opportunity.
I think one of the questions I'd raise, Madam Chair, if it's okay at this point.
Yes, please.
Is just to say that when we looked at this, there are a couple of things about this ordinance, or this statement, I guess, as we've been calling it. One is that we don't know from an administrative end how to enforce this. So that's one question that when we read this, we can't make a determination as to whether, since it's the select board, in the select board arena, are you supposed to sign this? And
Right.
then how does it relate to the planning board? Does it supersede the planning board? And I think the question that was asked was answered yes, that it does supersede the planning board, but that was very confusing to those who heard that answer. So there's no enforcement mechanism in here for us to go through and say, okay, and that's unlike a similar ordinance that has been put forward in Nottingham, where there is active litigation right now over that very issue because a company has sued the town of Nottingham over the issue of enforcement. And they are in active litigation right now trying to figure out what their role is in it. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think Selectwoman Cowan's question's a really good one because we administratively don't know where to begin with this and find it very, very non-specific and just difficult from an administrative end. I don't think we know what to do with it.
But I think you're correct when you say you never asked for a special board to be created. My recollection from the very beginning up through our meeting in January was we have existing boards, and that was my understanding. So you're correct in that statement. And I also, and I may have misunderstood you, and I want, if I'm wrong, please tell me, but my understanding is that you wanted the process to remain the same. It goes through the planning board like it normally would. You know, I too am conflicted as to how we're going to go about enforcing this. And then also my question is, if the planning board, would you be looking to the select board to overrule the planning board if, and I'm just going to say you, but you know what I mean, I don't just mean you, if you thought that the planning board had erred, would you look to the select board then to overrule the planning board? I'm just trying to get a grasp on the enforcement part of this.
I don't think that that would be the intention of the ordinance. I think the idea would be that this is something that all boards should be using when they make a decision. In the way that the select board is an oversight board to the entire town, and there is a select board member on the planning board, I would hope that the select board would have some knowledge of how this is being used, applied. I don't anticipate or think that people would then be saying to the select board, well, now you have to overturn the planning board's decision. I think the idea would be to avoid that by saying to the planning board, to the zoning board, to any decision maker, this is how you shall use this particular concept in your decision making. Would it be okay for me to invite Attorney Kelly to the podium? She may have a couple of points she could clarify as well from Mr. Mitchell's comments.
I'm fine with that, if the rest of the board.
Fine.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
Attorney Kelly, thank you for having me here and letting me speak. I guess I would just respond to that to clear the air on this, that this is an ordinance, that we have to refer to it as such. We have to treat it as such, according to the plain text of the ordinance itself and to settled precedent under New Hampshire law and the Supreme Court's interpretation of the way that this process works. And so I understand that it might be unfamiliar to many of you. It might be something that we're not quite sure how to deal with, but just because we want to not have to engage with it if we're unfamiliar with it does not mean that we can abdicate settled law and precedent. And you can see from the letter that Attorney Mitchell did not necessarily engage with substantively. Once you enact an ordinance as a town, it's valid and binding until overturned by an opinion of the judiciary. And I would caution against substituting a legal opinion for a judicial opinion. So we have legal opinions that conflict over the validity of this, but it's not proper for either me or Attorney Mitchell to say one way or the other what an ordinance is, but simply to defer to the principle that once you adopt an ordinance, it's valid until you overturn it. So I would love to engage substantively on the arguments as to the reasons that this ordinance are valid, but I would first say that they're not proper at this time, that we have to treat it as valid, regardless of whatever any attorney might think on either side, until a court of competent jurisdiction over this town declares it to be invalid. Do folks have questions on that point?
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if it's on that point, but one of the things Attorney Mitchell mentioned to us was, don't we need an overarching state and or federal constitutional law in order for this to be, I'm probably not saying it right, but how would you respond to that? Because that seems to me to be at the crux of this is there has to be more to it than just a group of citizens deciding that they want this sort of, this ordinance in place just because. There has to be more to it. There has to be something more substantive to it.
Right, so we have, with that point, a substantive argument as to whether or not this ordinance has constitutional authority. And we could see this, for example, the case that I cited in that letter, the Community Resources for Justice versus Manchester. We had a zoning ordinance in that case. There was a halfway house in Manchester, and there was a zoning ordinance that said you can't have correctional facilities in town. And there was a challenge to that ordinance, and they said you don't have the authority to issue that type of regulation. But we waited until the judiciary settled that issue, and it wasn't the town saying, we're not going to enforce this because it's not valid. It was the court saying, now we're going to hear this issue. So if there are questions as to the validity of this ordinance, you have to have standing to bring a challenge to that. So it would have to be enforced in a way that someone takes issue with, and then it would have to go to a court. But up until then, we have to do our best with it. And I want to encourage you to just cue off of the community group that has presented this ordinance for their insight, because they're clearly in touch with the will of the people, having proposed this ordinance and got enough signatures and done enough community outreach and education to have it pass with a majority vote. So this is clearly in the will of the people for this to be an ordinance that is in effect and in use. And if you go off of what people are, willing to work with you to help you figure out how to use this in ways that you might not be familiar with, but you're not alone. You have help on this, and you have an obligation under both statute and as elected officials who are representing the people and whose best interests you are charged to protect, which I'll make a note is slightly different than the role of a municipal attorney who is charged with the responsibility of avoiding liability for the municipality as a corporation, but not necessarily representing the collective population of that municipality. So that is you. This body is the collective interests of the people of this municipality. And they have proposed this binding and valid ordinance through the proper mechanisms, New Hampshire RSA 39:2 and 3, which I think we can all agree are not in dispute. And I'll just point you to New Hampshire RSA 39:3, that the selectmen shall insert in their warrant for such a meeting the petitioned article with only such minor textual changes as may be required. Such corrections shall not in any way change the intended effect of the article as presented in the original language of the petition. So this is clear, this language would be moot if nothing proposed by the citizens could have any effect whatsoever. There has to be an effect of citizen initiative petition articles for that mechanism to have meaning. And in this case it does, and the people have expressed their will. And the implementation of that is a collaborative process. The will of the people and their expression of that is one which has come from the people. And now you as the governing body who are the ones doing the work, who are on the ground day to day, running this town, that's why this is collaborative. And I'm just going to advocate for you to come together and to figure out how to enforce this by its plain terms as a valid binding ordinance. And if we want to get into the substance of the constitutionality of this and looking to the New Hampshire Constitution Articles 2 and 10 as the source for authority for this, I'd be happy to do that. But I would leave it at that, because that is kind of the limit of this conversation that we can have right now without calling in a judge to rule on the constitutionality of an ordinance.
May I ask you a question?
Go for it. Yeah.
In Article 30, at the end of page 2, going into page 3, it reads, I'll quote, "As we are purportedly constrained by state and federal law, which courts interpret to require us to accept such harmful corporate activity, we, the people of Exeter, are unable, under our current system of local government, to secure human rights and ecosystem rights by banning said activity. Therefore, we deem it necessary to alter our system of local government, and we do so by adopting this right to a healthy climate ordinance," end quote. So you're suggesting that the legislative and governing body in the town of Exeter can supersede the state and federal constitution by passing the citizens petition?
So supremacy.
And I'm not an attorney, so that's why
Yes.
I'm asking.
I think the way to think of this is we have rights enshrined. So there's something called an inherent right, which is something that need not be codified in law. You have it. We don't need a law saying you have the right to breathe. You have that. The right to local self-governance is so ingrained in the founding history of this country. We have this. We don't need it written on a piece of paper to have it. Fortunately, we do have it written in the 10th Amendment to the New Hampshire Constitution. We have it codified in the Article 2 of the Bill of Rights of the New Hampshire Constitution. So 2 and 10, essentially the governing power comes from the people. And this, again, engages substantively with the ordinance's validity. So I would prefer to be having this, this discussion in front of a judge, but I'm happy to have it here with you all.
I
Again,
tend to try to avoid litigation, so that's why I'm having the conversation here. But
yeah, and this, I mean, we could like dig into the fine points of this all night, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this here as well. But again, we have to approach this from the innocent until proven guilty, valid until taken off the books standpoint from a legal perspective. So this more gets into the understanding of where the community group is coming from and where they are citing their authority to do this from. Not just the community group, but the whole voting populace of this town that adopted this ordinance. So Article 2 of the New Hampshire Constitution, Part 1, says that the authority for the government comes from the people. The consent of the governed as the individuals that make up this community and this state as a whole, they delegate their authority to be governed to the state government. So it's contradictory for the state government to then turn around and pass laws that purport to regulate the individual's authority when the individuals acting as a collective and exercising their right to local self-governance are the ones that actually conveyed this authority to the state in the first place. So we can see that in our Constitution, and we know that when the Constitution and when laws conflict, we have to go with the Constitution. So right now there are concepts, legal doctrines in place that the state is using to pass laws that regulate such things as the environment, and we're not saying that we want to erode them to the extent that people can, do whatever they want. We're just saying that because the right to local self-governance is inherent and inalienable, that people have it and are allowed to legislate to expand their fundamental rights, but not to erode the floor that has already been set by the state. We're not trying to erode floor preemption, but rather to say that people can build on it in ways when the state regulations are not enough. So Article 10 is another relevant piece of the first part of the New Hampshire Constitution. And again, keeping in mind that the Constitution takes precedence over any state law. So it's not at all that this ordinance would purport to violate the Constitution, but rather to uphold it and to uphold these inherent rights that don't need codification for them to exist and to be valid. And to point out the fact that a lot of these state laws are infringing on these inherent inalienable rights, that a lot of these state laws are infringing on the constitutional guarantees to an accountable government that we, the people, can control to protect our best interests as a community. That might have been more than you bargained for when you asked that
No, it's
question.
actually interesting, thank you.
Okay.
I think
Well, yeah,
I'm trying to
yes.
figure out how to word my question. This state is not a home rule state,
Correct.
so we only get permission to do things from the state, and that you've described it more detailed like than my interpretation of it. So that just brings me back to the idea of enforcement. If the ordinance doesn't speak to it, and if the state hasn't given us a regulation to enforce this, how do we go forward? And we have. You say you gave an example that we have a right to breathe. So how do we stop people from breathing if we don't like it?
I would say I'm not going to advise you on how to stop people from breathing because I could get in trouble for that. But I will speak to whether a state is a Dillon's rule or a home rule state is a matter of judicial opinion. So the judges in your state will that's a doctrine that has come from the courts. But even the judiciary as a branch is confined by the plain text and the plain meaning of the Constitution, which they also are bound to interpret. So we would say in this instance that the judicial opinions in this state and the laws passed by the legislature that come into conflict with the Constitution should be rectified. We should have harmony and adherence to the supreme law of the land, which in the state of New Hampshire is the New Hampshire Constitution. And we're not trying to say that we are going to, eradicate Dillon's rule in its entirety, but that for specific matters which involve fundamental rights. So the fundamental right to have water and air that don't kill you, if that is something that the state is not adequately doing, then we have a fundamental right to that, and we need to use our government in the mechanisms provided in Articles 2, 10, and elsewhere in the New Hampshire State Constitution to take measures to do that. But it's not something that can be done at the expense of other fundamental rights, and should be done carefully and deliberately, and with the full consent and participation of all parties, which I think speaks to the second part of your question as how do we do that? I'm not a member of this community. I actually live in Vermont. I just practice law in New Hampshire. So I'm not the person to say how exactly this would get adopted. I would, again, defer to the residents of this town about, whether there's a vote before any major project comes into town and you say, we could consent to this, or we could say, no, this looks risky. And how you would define major project would be great to put out in a policy. But that, I'm not saying that you should do that. I'm saying that might be an example of a type of idea that might come from these two bodies collectively. Something like posting the ordinance on the website would be, the town website would be a great first step, just to put people on notice of the values that this town has and to deter the types of aggressive outside forces that might come in and try to undermine the rights that the people have asserted through this ordinance to clean air and water and autonomy over their ecosystems.
Thank you.
So I think it could look like many things is the summary, but the importance of that would be that it would be decided by both the select board and the community working in collaboration to figure out where people's interests and priorities are, and keeping in mind the work that you all are doing and would have to do to enforce it, and wanting to make sure that we're not putting an undue burden on you, making it easy as possible for everybody to comply with the protections that we've laid out in this ordinance.
I think Walter had a comment, but if you haven't.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. So you said that we could define what a major project is and then bring that to the public? Is that what you said? Because right now we have our planning board, excuse me, all the meetings are public and televised, so that if there was interest from people about this, how this applies to a project, they could come to that meeting and give their argument.
And then who would make the final decision on that?
The planning
The
board.
planning board.
Right. I think that might be, the point of this is that we, as a planning board, might be making decisions that are to the benefit of the town as a municipal corporation, but that might not go far enough in protecting the stated interests of the community and of the ecosystems in that community.
Well, then you are back to an Uber board, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because at the planning board, they are the land use people. I mean, that's why we have them. That is their level of expertise.
Right.
It's the rare thing that we would ever overrule them. They are a land use board. And that's what this is. This is really land use. I know you say it's civil rights, but it really isn't, because the practical aspect of this, I'm a practical person, so you have to, I have to deal in sort of reality here. And we're talking very sort of really lofty terms. It would be nice to know what was really behind all of this. Usually something like this, there's really something really at the core of it, and it would be great to know what that really was. Maybe
So I can-
Maura can let us know, or you can let us know what's really at the core of this, because it
Yes.
sort of dances around a lot of things. And what we said earlier, we don't want this board to be the board that's making final decisions on
Sure.
things that we have virtually no expertise, nor is that our role.
Yes. And I think it's important to emphasize that this is not a regulatory ordinance. It's not meant to supersede or be, part of the planning board's check-the-box criteria, but rather same, so that you could think, for example, of any number of things that are unlawful in this town. Like, I don't know, murder. And if you were to, for example, have a company that wants to come in and profit off of a blatantly illegal activity, and they want to put a building up, that building, a new large site development plan would have to go through the planning board. But if the underlying activity is one that is unlawful in the town, then it should not even be something that the planning board is contemplating, because it violates a law that, in this case, murder is a state criminal offense. But in the case of this town, it would be these prohibitions on the violations of people's rights to a clean environment, to a clean ecosystem, to clean air and water. And we can see, thinking of the extremes of what this might look like if a private bottled water company wants to come in and drain an aquifer, that's something that would raise some red flags and that the planning board would have to contemplate, are they even going to entertain a permit application for a site plan that would clearly violate the terms of this ordinance? And it's not a factor within their test, but rather a preliminary investigation according to whatever procedures the board and the community want to come up with. But it's just a prohibition on certain activities independent of the planning board process that could perhaps play an initial factor in whether they would entertain an application in the first place.
So any large development could be interpreted as as doing just that, correct?
I would say that depends entirely on context. I wouldn't have enough information to say this off the top of my head, that we can see very easily if somebody is just, repaving their driveway, that's not going to come into effect, but perhaps an industrial park with paving over, 50 acres of wetland, that totally would. And then perhaps there is a gray area within that it would be harder to decide, and that would be the key point probably for community input. So coming up with some kind of procedures that do allow the entire community to weigh in on the effects of a project might be a good way to go about it, because right now, the way that development works is we are going to assume that we don't do any harm to a community, even if the science behind the industry that is proposing the development shows a regular occurrence of lethal harm from that development. But it's assume healthy until proven otherwise. And this would simply flip the burden of proof to us that you're not going to harm our community, and then yes, green light to whatever development is going to come in. But the priority is the safety of the community and of the natural resource
So
systems.
if there were 100 houses and they're all being powered by oil, is that because it's fossil fuel, is that an issue too? I mean, would that be considered wreaking havoc on our right to clean air and water?
Well, I'm assuming the
And-
ones that are already built are grandfathered in, and the ones that would be future built as individuals wouldn't be subject to the terms of the ordinance. If it was a outside developer who was a corporation entity developing a 1,000-home condo unit, then maybe that would be something that we would want to talk about or have a conversation between the governing officers in the community about. But individual homeowners wouldn't fall under the purview.
No,
of
I'm
this.
saying, 100 lot subdivision or something like that. Or, 50 lot or 20 lot, it doesn't really matter. Like, this doesn't really give us that, doesn't tell us
Right.
what constitutes major. I guess that was back to your point, is how do you know what's major?
And maybe that could be hammered out in the form of policies that are adopted by the town with the support and input from the community group as to what actually this would look like. I think the important kind of stepping back and just remembering this is a valid binding ordinance, and it's, as it is written, is unfamiliar perhaps to people who have, not seen something like this and maybe didn't write it and don't quite have the vision for how it would look like to enforce it. But that steps can be taken carefully and with the input and with the careful process of it adopting policies to figure out together what that might look like. And that, not rushing into anything and making sure that we have buy-in from, the people who are protected by the rights enshrined in this ordinance as to what does it look like? What did you mean? So I think that, that is really, that is a great question to ask. And I appreciate you for having the community group here, for having these meetings, for saying, what would this look like and how can we put that into place?
Thanks. Walter, I think you wanted to respond.
And it wasn't so much as a response, but to wrap up a little bit, at least from the way I hear everything that's been discussed tonight, there have been 2 invitations issued. My invitation to the board is to, and it's more of a challenge than an invitation, but is to read the ordinance. And can you figure out from reading it what it is that you're supposed to do? And the invitation that's been issued by this young lady is an invitation for the town of Exeter and its taxpayers to be sued. Because what she suggests is that no matter how illegal, and I'm not the decision maker, you're the decision maker, but if you accept our guidance, no matter how illegal, she wants you to try to enforce this ordinance in some vague way, because the whole thing is vague, the content, against property owners. That's going to get you sued. And that happens sometimes if it's for a good purpose. But the strong likelihood here is that the town of Exeter and its taxpayers are going to lose that litigation. Thank you.
Russ, did you have anything more to say?
No, just to point out that as I think I alluded to earlier, there's a case in Nottingham being litigated as we speak. A lot of the issues that have been raised tonight and discussed are part of that litigation in terms of a company suing the town over enforcement of a very similar ordinance again in that community. And a judge has not yet ruled on the validity or the issues that have been raised in that case. And I know we definitely wanted people to be aware of that, and be able to educate themselves about some of the points of view that have been expressed in that particular case, because I think it at least, again, people can disagree about what is being discussed, but it's important to read that and understand at least there's another perspective that has been brought to the table, and all of this is wrapped into that. So, and again, like I said to you before, administratively, the concern about enforcement is real, not just from the overly broad perspective of looking at this, but just how would we manage to do it day to day. And I know we don't have all night to talk about it, but I personally, I don't know where to start with it either, so.
Yeah,
At
I
this point,
see-
but maybe we'll get some guidance out of the litigation that's out there.
I would think that in order to put some working, something into, we would have to have almost like a master plan of this. It would require some kind of consulting, because just to figure out what the parameters are with something like this. So, because I don't think that any of us have the expertise, nor does, I guess the town planner would have something to, if we were to go on with this. So what are the board's wishes on this?
Well, my concern has been somewhat all along. I agree with Mr. Mitchell in terms of the vagueness of it. Because to me, we have, if you've been in Exeter any length of time, despite what ends up ultimately happening, we have a really defined process between Conservation Commission, technical review, the planning board, the zoning board. I mean, there are a lot of steps. You ask any small developer, anyone from someone just subdividing a lot to someone who's doing 50 homes, or as Ms. Corson mentioned earlier, 100, whatever. We have very strict rules in this town. We follow the state guidelines as well. And I think it's very difficult actually to develop an Exeter. You ask anyone. And in some ways we can be proud of that. Because we make it difficult only because we want to do it right. And, this, to me, this is another sort of on top of that type of thing. It's sort of glomming on top of it, but it isn't even as defined as what we have today. So again, the short-winded thing, I've been clear on this before, and I'll say it again. I'm not in favor of, if it got voted, that's fine, but it's not easy to enforce. We already have plenty of rules and regulations and steps to follow. The public is well informed. We have public hearings. Everyone knows what's going on in this town when things are being developed. So I don't see this as, it's beyond belt and suspenders. I just don't see this as something that's going to be good for this town at all, or we're going to end up in court. And that is exactly what the attorney said. You're basically saying, you won't know anything until it's in front of a judge. That's right. And that's when it'll be litigation. And I am not the least bit interested in putting this town through unnecessary litigation.
Molly, do you have anything to say?
I mean, I think that I'm just still listening and learning.
Nico?
I echo that, and I'm very open to thinking outside the box, and I'm very open to something new, and I'm open to, it's it's an evolving world, so I'm open to discussion. I'm uncomfortable posting anything on a website or putting an ordinance up until we can have further discussions to kind of define what we're talking about. And the reason for that, and I have one reason for that only, the reason for that is while we continue our communication, it could set up the opportunity for the town to be involved in unnecessary litigation. And I don't want to put the town through that. I don't want to put the taxpayers through that unduly. But I am open to continuing discussions to see how we can try to find common ground if that's possible. And that's my only reason right now for not wanting to put the ordinance up until we can further, because it is vague. And, for us to get a better understanding in terms of enforcement and what it is we're talking about, I would feel more comfortable with more information and more definition. Thank you.
Julie?
Excuse me. Yeah, I supported this and voted actually to sign the ordinance. But I am still troubled, I have to say, about how it plays out. And I would like to see a test project. And the proponents of the ordinance, as well as us, and maybe to take a project through. In theory, let's see what it looks like when a builder or developer comes in with a project. It goes through the technical advisory committee, goes to the planning board, zoning board if necessary, but let's, try the extremes and see how that, what's the outcome of that? My first instinct is going to be, maybe the planning board does take care of it, but I'd like to see a sample, I guess. The Nottingham case to me is a sample, and I have to say the judge's ruling on it is very clear, but their ordinance isn't quite the same as ours. So that's my suggestion.
Okay, so where do you want to go from here? Because
Well,
there's 3 of you that will be on the board this month, and there's 2 of us that don't, and I don't want to burden you any more than you are. So I would like to hear what you had to say. I'm not going to weigh in.
Morris had something to say.
I just wondered if I could briefly comment to Ms. Sermon's point. I do think it's important to recognize that, yes, the planning board has very explicit procedures in place, technical review committee, and so on. They don't go this far. They do not allow the community to say, this harm is too much for this community. What they do is follow regulations enacted by the state, which say, this level of harm is acceptable to us as a state. We don't want to have to say yes to that. We want to have an opportunity for the planning board to have to say, this community does not accept this level of harm. So in answer to that point around whether we have existing regulations that are sufficient, that the planning board is already following, I would argue that we don't. And although it is being argued in court via the Nottingham ordinance, it is still valid according to state law. And I do believe that we as a town should be acting as such. I don't think posting it on the website is asking a lot. I think it's just asking to acknowledge that this ordinance was passed by the town. I would love to have the opportunity for us as a community group to talk to board members as we go along and to say, I think a test case is a great idea. That would be a perfect opportunity to look at the entire process and say, how would it make sense to do this? But until we've had that opportunity, it's hard to know what to do now. Thank you.
I will point out that the planning board, some of our regulations are stricter than the state's. So you do have that opportunity from a planning board level to make those, that happen. We have a fertilizer ordinance that is one of the only ones in the state. We have things in our planning, subdivision site regulations and in our zoning ordinance that some towns do not have. I think, and my 2 cents on looking at one development and having to go through the process, what's that going to cost the developer? And then find out that they were doing it anyways, but that's up to you. It may say to the developer, you know what, I'm not gonna add that to my costs, I'm not gonna go there, I'll go to another town. And even though that development was gonna be good for all, you've now lost that development.
I'm not talking about, let's see a case that's already been applied for. I'm talking about,
That's how I do it.
get some members of the planning board, maybe not even the whole planning board, but they have to interpret it. And, a friendly developer who wants to see how this would affect them. Select board to watch and members of the community that have an interest in this. And just see how it rolls out. And if we're interpreting it as they are.
Great, yeah.
So it wouldn't be a, hey, Guy, come on in and let us.
So where
That's on
do you want to go from here? What do you want to do? Do you want to, I have a suggestion. I'm not going to suggest anything, so.
Well, I guess the opportunity is to put an invitation out to planning board members, ZBA members, select board, town planner, et cetera, and find a developer, given it, make a request of some representative of projects that the planning board has seen, like a small one and a large one. And so I guess I would be organizing that. I don't know, or find somebody on the planning board that would be interested.
I mean, I think it would make sense to have sort of a working group workshop, how to bake some of these concepts into the regulatory bodies who oversee this stuff in the town. So before we go forward with a test case, that's something, I would like to talk through sort of the rules of the road for what we're even asking for. And so maybe that starts with a working group or, how do we develop dialogue around this? Which I don't know that it makes sense to have the full select board bit there, but maybe we can have some representatives from the select board, from these different groups, to sort of have a working dialogue to begin to talk about how we test it.
So that, I was going to say, would it be worth your while if one or two of the select board meet with you and whomever and just try to tie it up or, discuss your concerns, discuss our concerns, and try to find a common ground. I think the test case is a great idea, but I think it would be premature until we have an opportunity. So perhaps, as Madam Chair has indicated, we have an election next week. So if we could get through that and maybe establish, we have a board meeting on the 16th. If you would allow us to establish our new board, then perhaps we could reach out to you immediately thereafter and try to set something up. Would that be fair?
I would appreciate that. And I think, as Ms. Cowan was mentioning, that's really initially what we were hoping to do when we came to you, was to say, can we have a working group? Can we talk about this? And it went in a different direction, but that is exactly what we'd like to do. And even to Ms. Gilman's point about a test case, I feel like even working with a hypothetical development rather than an existing proposal, something that,
Right.
We could all sort of say,
right.
here's the what ifs, and
Correct.
how would this play out, and allow that conversation to unfold. I think that'd be really
Then if you'll
helpful.
allow, we'll get through our next meeting and then we'll be in contact.
Okay, thank you. Would it be permissible for Ms. Sanborn to speak for just a moment? I understand that
We have
you
a
other
really
agendas.
long meeting, if you don't mind, she can speak at a later date, but we have other people that are in the audience, and whatever,
Thank
fine.
you.
I don't want to
I appreciate your
infringe on it.
consideration. If the agenda is too full, I will certainly accede to your
I
request.
feel like
Thank you.
we've,
Maura, we do have a full agenda tonight, but we'll be in touch with you. Thank you.
okay. Thank you, Walter, for coming, appreciate it. All right, we are going to go back in time here, and we're going to go to our To our public comment, is anyone here for public comment? Okay, we'll move on. Proclamations and recognitions, we don't have any. Then we have the approval of the meeting minutes for February 18th. Does anybody have any questions on those? Any changes whatsoever?
Madam Chair, I'd make a motion to approve the Select Board meeting minutes of Tuesday, February 18th, 2020.
Great.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Then we will go on to appointments. We had an interview tonight, and I believe...
I'd like to make a motion, Madam Chair, if I
Thank
may.
you.
I'd like to move that we appoint Mr. Connor Berry to the Communication Committee.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Madam Chair, just to verify the term on that, 4/30/21. Is
Okay.
that the?
Do you want to just...
I'll amend the motion to include the term effective 4/30/21.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, then we will go to the external communications analysis that was done. Nick Campion. Russ, did you want to introduce?
Yes, I'll take just a minute if I can. This is Nick Campion, who was actually just recently completed his MPA at UNH. And we had some really robust conversation at our department level about the way we communicate with each other, with the public, and getting information out. So it seemed like a great project for Nick to take on as his capstone for his MPA program. He is a government professional. He works down in Danvers in their Parks and Recreation Department, and I think he did a great job with it. And I don't want to presuppose his results, so I'll leave him to go through the rest with you, which I think you'll find very good.
Thank you, and good evening. As Russ said, I'm a municipal employee down in Massachusetts, MPA student. I actually just wrapped up at the end of December. I also live in town. I'm on 75 Newfields Road. So I appreciate everything that you guys do. I'm one of those people that's often seen on the Facebook page watching the meetings, because I got 2 toddlers at home, so getting here is sometimes tough. But I promise I won't try to take up too much of your time. I know you've got a packed agenda, so I'll try to be brief while hitting all the main points that I tried to capture in my study. I think you guys have it in your packet, if I'm not mistaken. But essentially, what I was digging into was a societal shift that we're seeing in the ways that communities are communicating and getting their message out to their constituents. So my project scope was to kind of review and investigate the organizational structure of external communication for the town of Exeter, and analyzing the technology, purpose, and frequency in which each department communicates with the public, and how the departments connect essentially with the public. But before I jump into too much of the findings, I think it's important just to kind of keep some of these statistics in the back of your head. Every day, every minute, there's 300 hours uploaded to YouTube. There's 500 million tweets that are tweeted per day, 2.7 billion monthly users on Facebook, 2.1 billion daily, and just under 70% of US adults are on Facebook. So I think it's important just to keep that in the back of your head as I kind of dive into some of this. So how did I investigate the issue here in Exeter? First, I established kind of a baseline of Exeter's demographics, population, median age, so on and so forth, looking into each department, figuring out the structure, the landscape. And then I investigated the issue. I conducted interviews with the departments. Essentially, I just held up a mirror to all the department heads and said, anything that you're telling me is going to bounce right back into this report. We looked into qualitative and quantitative analysis. I had to aggregate and clean a lot of the data because there was so much data. I also did an interview Externally, with communities that have directors of communication or public information officers, that gave me something to kind of bounce back against later in the study. I also did a content analysis, looking into the best practices for municipalities and just kind of the technology trends that are emerging in the landscape. Like I said, I found a lot of data. I found the purpose, the preferences, the cost, the frequency, the control, the strengths and weaknesses, so on and so forth. By just sitting down and having these interviews with, the director of Parks and Rec, or the library, or the police chief, the fire chief, finance, all across the organization. And what I found, the majority of the platforms that the community uses, almost everyone uses the town website to communicate outwards. Social media was close behind. Newspaper is a popular one, in public forums. Those were kind of the top four platforms that everybody uses. Not everybody strives to communicate with the public, but some of those departments that do strive will use multiple platforms in getting their word out. There were three main purposes of outreach, the largest being informative public service, where 63% of departments would use that as their main, they would define that as their main purpose. An example of that would be town hall's closed today, or there's a parking ban in effect. 12% use public outreach for regulatory notices, notice to abutters, tax and water bills, and then 25% use it as promotional. An example being there's a new show on EXTV, or a festival update, or Easter egg hunt, or so be it. The communication preferences largely skewed towards Facebook and email. 53% of departments prefer getting their word out through Facebook, and 27% prefer email blasts, whether it's through MailChimp or Constant Contact. I found that here in Exeter, there's 20 social media pages across the departments, from the health department to EXTV, Parks and Rec, library, police, fire, etc. 14 of those were Facebook pages, 3 were Twitter, 3 were Instagram. The largest platform that was used was the Facebook the Facebook for the town of Exeter, which has over 5,000 followers. There's some compelling charts in the report that really kind of highlight those numbers. I'll quickly point out a couple of my favorite findings from this study. We had 67% of departments communicating multiple times a week, 8% only doing it daily. Strengths and weaknesses, the strengths of external communication, the number one was defined as social media at 45%. Number 2 is public forums and press releases. The weaknesses of external communication was consistent engagement and too many tools. That led to one of my favorite quotes from the entire study. I'll leave this person anonymous, but he said that there was too many cooks and no master chef, which I'll leave it up to you to guess who that was. The control of external communications by the departments, 55% of the departments have one person that's just in charge of getting the word out. Other departments had multiple people. Some of the barriers to the success, time, 53% of the departments define time as their number one barrier. 27% of departments said that legal issues, they're too worried about upsetting someone or getting in trouble, which I think is pertinent. And then one of my favorite results from the study was that the overall perception that departments had of their work, their external outreach, rated much higher than the towns. So everybody thinks that they're doing it better than everybody else, which I always find kind of interesting. Let's see. And then basically through all of that data and all that research, I came up with a few recommendations, a couple of short-term, a couple of long-term. The short-term being pretty obvious, celebrating the successes. An example of that would be once a project was done, a capital project, it might be the kayak launch down on the river, inviting the press down, doing a press release, inviting in the abutters or the local businesses to kind of, toot your own horn because it's a great project and it deserves recognition. Putting it up on social media. Another short-term recommendation would be to consolidate some of the redundancies on social media. Throughout my research, and this was done back in November, December, so at the time, there was, I think, 4 pages associated with the Parks and Rec. There was 2 or 3 associated with the library. It's of my opinion that the message gets strained. If you're trying to get something major out, you'll see that, for example, and these aren't actual statistics, but the main Exeter Facebook page has 1,000 more followers than one of their other sub pages. They have the pool page, they have the rec park page, they have another one, but that's just an example. Another short-term recommendation would be to seek internal experts. There's some highly skilled department heads, and in particular, Bob from the Exeter TV group was phenomenal. That guy has a tremendous wealth of knowledge and resources, and I think any department could benefit from sitting down with him and saying, hey, where could we get a little bit better? And also the communications committee here in Danvers, in Exeter, I think could absolutely be a resource. Some of the longer term recommendations, I think it would be important to develop a communication strategies master plan. Of course, that comes with money, but perhaps that's an opportunity for Exeter to once again partner with UNH to kind of get that off the ground. I know there's a lot of eager students in my program. And then also, I think that the town could benefit from looking into either hiring or appointing a public information officer or a director of communication. I think I identified that a little bit more succinctly in the report, but there's definitely some key benefits that I think Exeter could certainly prosper from. And I think we're seeing that across the municipal landscape of communities really sinking their teeth into how communication is changing drastically. And last but not least, I'll just leave you with this. With studies showing that people are forecasted to spend 3 hours and 22 minutes on their smartphone every day this year, beating time spent on a computer. That's for the first time ever this year. And a projection of 72.6% of internet users accessing the web solely by their phone in 2025. I think it's critical and important for Exeter to consider thinking mobile friendly in all of their initiatives going forward as they communicate outwards. So that's my report. I believe my contact information is in there. If you have any additional questions, I'm happy to field any now. If you think of any, feel free to send them my way, but.
Thank you. That's very informative. And really appreciate it. Does anybody have any comments, questions?
I have 2 questions. But Molly, did you have?
No, go ahead first.
I just have 2 quick questions.
Sure.
When you mentioned just a moment ago having a director of communications or communications officer,
Yes.
obviously that would get in a very long line of personnel needs that
Absolutely.
the town, isn't ready for. Within your research, and you may not have seen this, but within your research here in town, can you identify anybody that you may have met with that might be able to handle this responsibility, or any department could you recommend that could handle this responsibility in lieu of hiring somebody that we may not be able to hire?
So if I'm understanding correctly, someone in Exeter to
Right
be
now.
appointed to something like that?
Yeah. No. Right, somebody right now within the town departments.
Yeah, certainly. I think there's certainly a couple of very qualified and competent individuals that, should they get kind of the blessing to take that initiative in that direction, I think.
So without name, in your opinion, we have the resources already, perhaps?
I think so.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. And then my second question is, with the mobile apps, when you met with Bob Glowacki, did he go over the My Exeter app that we currently have?
Yes. So as you'll find in the report,
Yeah, we're not using it enough.
exactly. Yeah. So I really dove into that. Everybody is kind of aware of it, but they don't fully understand the power of it. I think people, directors, I should say, I think the directors look at the website and say, if they can just go here to get all the information, why would they need to go there to get the information? So I think it's a matter of figuring out how to utilize it
So it could be
best.
valuable.
It could be valuable,
Okay.
yes.
Great, thank you.
Yep. And then I'm just going to circle back to that first question.
Sure.
I do think that there is someone in town or a couple people in town that are capable. However, if that was something that they were to take on, I think that would restrict their capabilities to perform their other duties
Understood.
to the fullest of their potential.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have one. On the chart that shows the platforms, different social media platforms that
Yes.
people use, and if I understand correctly, in giving two departments as examples, you'd recommend that they all shift to just one, like just Facebook and not Facebook, Instagram, and the one, Twitter.
Yes, yeah. So, well, not necessarily. I think what the recommendation is pointing towards is the departments that have multiple of one. So,
Oh, I see.
like the 4 Facebook pages, in my recommendation, I think should be consolidated to one.
Yep.
I think the different platforms, whether it's Instagram or Twitter, I think that's good because, the citizenry here in Exeter certainly engages differently. So I think having a variety is to the benefit. And there's a lot of tools now that, I'll give you an example. If I log on to Facebook, I can tie that in with my Instagram. So I can put up a message or a post that will also tie in with the Instagram. So you can hit 2 different populations
That's good
with
to know.
just one simple tool. Yeah.
I'm not quite a Luddite, but I'm pretty close.
Okay. I think that was fantastic, and we do have a communications committee meeting tomorrow, and we'll go through it then.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move along, and we will have Doreen next for our fourth quarter financial report. Doreen is our director of finance, I should say. Finance director, sorry. There you go. Is that on?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Okay, good evening. I just want to quickly say thank you to Ann Sermon and Kathy Corson for their years of service to the town. It's been a pleasure working with you, and hope I'll see you on some other committees.
It won't be far away.
But thank you very much.
Thanks, Doreen.
All right, I'm here to report the Q4 results for the town for 2019, and I'll try to make it brief. I have a very detailed report, and it's published online and in the packet tonight, and I know you have a lot to discuss after me. Just some highlights of the general fund revenue. This year, the actual revenues were 19.7, which is about 639,000 over the projection. And some reasons why. The motor vehicle was up 65,000 at 3.1 million. Building permits and fees was up 246,000 due to a lot of projects, and I've listed some examples. We also got back, which was really a pleasure, from the state revenue sharing. It was taken away or suspended, as they called it, after 2009. And we got an unexpected $159,000 from the state this year. So that contributed to our increase. Our meals and rooms tax revenue comes in every December, and that was at 779,000, a slight increase of 5,000 from the prior year. And also our income from departments was 1.1 million, up 147,000 from the prior year. Some of them were one-time items, such as the LED streetlight program utility rebate for 132,000. Our blue bag revenue is 592,000, which is up 55,000. And I'll talk about how that relates to our costs later. It sounds like a good number, but you'll
It's not,
be hearing maybe otherwise. Transfer station permit fees increased 14,000 at 35. And then we had the new brush dump fees that brought in 6,000. The one thing I will tell you, jumping back up to property taxes, I kind of broke it out. It won't add up, so just so you're aware of it. We are on a calendar year and the schools are on a fiscal year, so we did bill, in fact, $51 million in tax revenues this year, which got allocated out probably 2/3 to the schools and to the county. So, but when you do go and add those up, they won't, just because of the difference in our reporting years. We will pay the school, though, next year, the other piece that they're owed. Also, there was a sale of town property on Garrison Lane, which brought in $132,000, and a nice interest kick this year of $133,000. It's up from about $1,300 from the prior year
And
dollars.
that's due to your efforts. Thank you, Doreen.
And the town manager, I
Yes,
have to give
that's
him the
great.
thanks too.
Yes.
We had some transfers in, which are typical from the EMS revolving fund. We get 95% of the revenues after all expenses, and that gets transferred into the general fund, and that was 220. We had a couple of projects with excess bond proceeds that we do legally get to expend. We brought those back into the general fund for debt service payments that we can use those for. And then we had just some reimbursements from the trustee of trust funds, snow and ice, sick leave, transportation, and so forth. On the expenditure side, you're going to hear the words retirement probably more times than anything this evening, having to do with a lot of variance reporting. The general fund was 18.9 million spent this year versus a $19.6 million budget. So there's a positive variance of 717,000. However, we did carry over about $228,000 in warrant articles. So we encumbered those, the select board did those at the end of the year, and those projects will be tied up this year for 2020 and expensed. The general government group, which represents the board, the town manager, HR, legal, town clerk, and so forth. The expenditures were 867,000 or 98% spent against budget, leaving a balance in total for the category of 21,000. And I'll just remark on one of the variances in town clerk. There was a retirement of the assistant town clerk in May of 2019. So we realized $19,000 right in that category there. And I believe the opportunity was replaced in about a month, but as we replace senior staff, they come in at a lower level on our grades. So that's why we're going to be seeing a lot of, I don't know if I want to call it savings, but you'll see that it didn't meet the budget this year. In the finance group, we have finance, tax, assessing, and IT. And I'll start with my group. Well, total overall expenditures were 864,000 or 97% spent, leaving a balance of 23.6 thousand. In finance, I had a retirement of the accounting clerk in May. In tax collection, there was a retirement of the deputy tax collector in July. So we had some turnover there. The tax office had $13,000 balance left, and we hired in mid-October for the replacement. Meanwhile, we had an interim person that was working that got hired. IT is 99% spent. The current year reflects some scheduled computer equipment purchases of 31,000 during 2019. And he's on a 5-year schedule, I believe. In planning and other boards, the expenses are 545,000, close to 100%. I don't see that often, but the expenses in the planning department, I'll talk about a $20,000 match for grant expenditures for MTAG, and that was offset with 11.5 in revenue this year in the general fund, and that's run by our planner. And in economic development, we had 139,000 or 97% spent versus the prior year. And there was $5,000 left over due to unspent. We have secretarial for meetings and intern wages in that department. Stop me if anybody has questions as I go along. Police department, full of retirements. The police department expenditures were 3.4 million, 92% spent. And there is $290,000 less than budget in the current year. And in police administration, we had the police chief retire in January of 19. We had the office manager retire in June of 2019. And again, we didn't wait very long, but people incoming were placed at a different level on the scales there. So there were some savings, 77.8 thousand in the police administration. In the police staff division, we had a sergeant that left early in the year. So there were some savings there between the time of hiring and a more senior person leaving. Patrol division retirement, the animal control officer retired in April, and that was not replaced until December. And I understand that that's a tough job to find someone to do. I'll jump over to DPW, or no, I'm sorry, I skipped fire, didn't I?
Fire, yeah.
The fire department expenses are 3.75 or 97% spent through the current year. In fire administration, there was a new position that was approved for 2019. It was for a part-time clerk position, and the hiring there got a little bit delayed. So there was 9.7 thousand due to wages, benefits, taxes that was left in the budget at the end of the year. For fire suppression, we had a veteran firefighter that retired in 2018 at the end that wasn't replaced until February. So there were some savings also in that department realized. Jumping over to Public Works, that department is 5.3 million or 99% spent against this year's budget. In stormwater, and I highlight that because there was $47,000, only 79% of their budget expended by the end of the year. So there was a $32,000 balance, which got encumbered, 20,000 of it at year end for asset management. So that will be utilized during 2020. In highways and streets, 1.9 million or 95% spent. There were a few large ticket items that didn't get expended, such as the paving of 54,000 and street marking of 15.5. In speaking to the highway superintendent, he was unable to get contractors. I guess it's been really tough on everybody to find them, and then you have to work with the weather. So some of that did not get accomplished in 2019. Here's the one I alluded to earlier, solid waste. I had talked about the blue bag revenue. Now here's the reality of our solid waste program. The program, the solid waste, we spent 1.3 million or 102% that was spent against the budget. The trash collection and the recycling are the largest expenditures in the department. And currently, and I was wowed by these numbers, trash collection is $76 a ton. and recycling is $120 a ton. So there, it's definitely more on that, but the town, and I know Jennifer and DPW is still asking that people please do recycle. It's important to us right now. And also, that doesn't include the cost of a truck to haul the stuff away, which is $24,000 for every month that we do this. So they really are substantial costs, and the blue bag revenues of 592 do offset, so it helps out, but there is definitely not 100% revenue and expense in this category. As far as the next one, snow and ice, it was an extraordinarily snowy year. I believe, from what I remember, frequent storms early on, I think the first part of the year, but the budget expenditures were $465,000, or 148% was spent, leaving a deficit of $150,000 in the snow and ice category, which was discussed, I think, several times last year, and the board approved $100,000 to offset these expenditures from our snow and ice deficit account, which we brought into the general fund to assist with that large expenditure. In the maintenance department, there was a large project that was deferred for the cupola for the town hall, and that was encumbered at $26.5 thousand. So there was a little bit of a variance, but that's being brought forward to be utilized in 2020. Welfare, I will mention there's been a large uptick in the number of cases that have come into the town. I understand there's some state programs that have been dropped. So all the towns, not just Exeter, but all of them are seeing the results of that. And we had $53,000 just in direct rent alone for assistance for local folks this past year. And I'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions on general fund at all? Okay, I will continue. Water fund budget, the water fund revenues are 3.65 million, or 111% above its expectation this year. The water consumption charges are 2.99 million, exceeded expectations by 142,000. The water service charges are 587,000, increased over projection by 108 this year. And the water impact fees came in at an assessment at $13,000 and $16,000. There was a rate adjustment in October of 2019. And actually, you know, these things are building because of all the projects we have, the old town, the old pipes, buildings, and we'll talk about that on the flip side with sewer for support of the wastewater treatment plant, but that necessitates changes in rates from time to time. So I did put the water rates here, and it's in the packet and on our website, so if anybody is curious about those. And getting into the water expenses, they are at 3.28 million, or 99% spent. In water administration, the expenses were 339,000 with a $28,000 variance. There was a decrease in wages and taxes in that category due to a delay in the senior water sewer assistant engineer, it's a hard thing to say, position that kind of got postponed until August of 2019. So there were savings there. In water distribution, the expenses are 791,000, or 98% spent. Again, wages, taxes, benefits, 10.8 less due to timing of filling a department vacancy due to transfers out of this department. A lot of folks have transferred over to the sewer side. In water treatment, we had expenses of 751,000. Overtime wages were up over 19,000, but we did realize some savings due to some programs that were in for natural gas. We saved 11,000. In electricity, we saved 4,000, and then some other short net decreases. In debt service, we're at 1.15 million. It has increased this year by 30,000 due to the project for Washington Street being finalized and coming online as debt service. And then we had a water appropriation from reserves, and this is for the water treatment design of 63.6 and an older Washington Street project for 47.2, which was approved by the board. And that will offset some deficits in the capital projects fund. On the sewer budget, sewer fund revenues, 4.4 million or 154% collected over the expected budget. The biggest driver is a $712,000 increase in revenues, and a lot of those are attributable to these sewer rate increases. The usage charges are 3.67 million or 47% higher than originally projected. Service charges, 565 and 45% higher than projected. I've published also the rates here for sewer, which are also online. And the reason we're having to increase those rates, as well as the water rates, is the debt service that we are going to be facing with the building of the new $54 million wastewater treatment plant that came online in 2019. So going into sewer expenses, the administration expenses are 372 or 95% spent against budget. And similar to water administration, the position of the assistant water sewer engineer was delayed. So we have some savings in that department because the positions split 50-50 to water and to sewer. In sewer collection, the expenses are 578 or 87% spent through the year. There's an unspent balance of 87,000, which 40 for pipe relining was encumbered to be used in the year 2020. In the sewer treatment, 899,000 or 97% spent. There was a balance of 25,000, and there was planned the hiring of a new wastewater operator, and that got filled in November of 2019. So the plan was for earlier, so we had a little savings because it didn't occur till later in the year. Now here's the kicker. The reason, the rationale for the sewer rates is our debt service. This year, debt service increased $212,000, and it is $881,000. We had a surprise at the end of the year. DES called, we were expecting to pay for the wastewater treatment plant next year, because usually we end a project and we'll pay the first of the next year. But due to some guidance they were given from their auditors and the way these loans work, the forgiveness and so forth, we ended up paying $305,000 in December of this year that was not budgeted. Next year, our payment will be $4.3 million that we'll pay for this project, and it'll decline, but these are going to be some big payments, and they're, the rationale for raising the rates. We also have an appropriation from sewer reserves that reflects a $24,000 charge for Belmont Street Pump Station that will be transferred into the sewer capital project funds to cover prior year deficits.
I just have one quick question. Are we fully staffed on the water treatment plant now then? I mean, the sewer.
The wastewater plant?
Wastewater.
Yes.
So
Yes,
no
we are.
additional.
Yeah, I wanted to make a quick point too, just about the sewer fund debt service. As Doreen pointed out, the increase in the debt service, the board, you recall that we approved some reserves to be paid out to, as Doreen said, from DES's recommendation, and those were offset, I think, by 60,000 or so, and I'll call it initial state aid grant, but it also positioned us for FY20 to receive over $700,000 from the state and state aid grant funds. So the other thing I'd point out is our first year payment for the first full year payment of 4.3 million that will, in 2020, that will be offset by the 700,000, and then it drops to, I believe, 3.6 in the second full year of payback. So at least we get a decent drop in 2021 on that. But as I said before, it's going to be incumbent upon us to keep talking to our legislators about making sure that state aid grant money is maintained in the state budget. It's very important. If it were to slip out somehow, we would have to make that up, and that's pretty substantial.
Thank you. That is correct. All of those items that Russ addressed about the grant, the wastewater grants. Now, going into revolving funds, we have cable television. They had revenues of $149,000 for 2019. There was wages of $101,000 spent through the current year, a little higher in the prior year. There was some actual turnover in the part-time folks in cable, which is unusual. It was unusually busy, but I believe we've replaced everybody at this point. The general expenses are $85,000, coming down from $128,000 in the prior year. There was a one-time expenditure for the cable TV office relocating to the town hall building last year, and that was $69,000. Moving on to recreation, rec revolving fund, $716,000 in the current year versus $732,000, a slight decline of $16,000, a drop in their special event revenue this year, and the rec impact fees, which you just never know, those are based upon building, they dropped $97,000 from the prior year. I understand some of the buildings that are going up aren't eligible for those fees due to senior housing. Also, program revenues have increased $59,000, offset some of the drops for some expansion of summer programs. And then heading into expenses, the wages and taxes are $255,000, a little bit higher than a prior year by $5,000. Their general expenses, typical recreation programming, $184,000, special events, $44,000. And then they had some capital outlay last year that's noteworthy as far as utilizing some of the revolving fund revenues. They utilized $100,000 in impact fees for kids' park renovations, tennis and basketball resurfacing, a new pool filter pump, Gilman Park fencing, a pool vacuum, chemical controllers, basketball hoop correctors, pool lift, splash pad filter, and some other miscellaneous. So they made a lot of improvements with the impact fees last year. And then last but not least, the EMS revolving fund brought in $580,000, which is $27,000 higher than the prior year. Definite increase in call volume during 2019. Expenses also up due to that reason. The expenses are $377,000. They're up $51,000, and most of it's attributable to the wages, the overtime wages to respond to the calls. There was also a new ambulance lease purchased in 2019, and it's on a 3-year lease at payments of about $78,000 for 3 years. They also purchased a new CPR compressor for $10,700 approved by the board late in 2019. And that's all I have, unless there are questions.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Very thorough. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, we will move along to our public hearing for Swayze Parkway event fees and facility fees. And I believe we need to open a public hearing, so we need a motion.
Madam Chair, I move to open the public hearing regarding Swayze Parkway event fees.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, so
The sheet in the package, just to kick it off, is based upon the board's conversation back in December and also the last conversation you had at your last meeting on this. So we've attempted here to incorporate all of the different pieces that I think were discussed at your last meeting. So hopefully, everything looks as you may have recalled it. I know there were some discussions about the 6-state limitations, the nonprofit, for-profit, the reservation about 12 months and 11 months for residents and non-residents, and then the grandfathering of the farmers market, and for-profit fee $150 per date. I think that's what was discussed last meeting.
Okay, so just to go over the fees specifically, so we have a one-day nonprofit event. A single organization may only rent the parkway for up to 6 dates per calendar year, and that's $100 per date. For-profit day event, a single organization may only rent the parkway for up to 6 dates per calendar event. That's $150 per date. The farmer's market, we had, I don't know if we have to, what we did is, yes, we took out the seasonal. So that's basically, and tonight, that's what we're talking about specifically, because we have to have a public hearing when it comes to fees. So, does anybody want to discuss this, change it before I send it out to the public? Is everybody fine that I send it out to the public? All right, so I will send it out to the public for any comment. Everybody's happy with what is proposed. Nobody wants to discuss it. Okay, you did come here. So, you sat it's now almost 9 o'clock.
Well, this won't be anywhere near as interesting as the financial report, which I think Doreen actually makes interesting. So I don't know how she does that. I'm Martha McEntee. I'm an Exeter resident at 10 Chestnut Street. And I'm here to support Swag on Swayze in particular. I've been going to Swag on Swayze since it first started a few years ago. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out it's not just another flea market. It really has a unique air that highlights the values of our community. We have people who not only are regular professional flea market sellers, but I'll just tell you one story. Early on in Swag on Swayze, there was this table with beautiful handmade woodworked cutting boards and little knife holders and things like that. And all of the things were made by a local teenager whose mother was there helping him learn how to sell. And he was so proud that people were stopping by and talking about how great his woodworking was. So it's not just an opportunity for somebody to go sell off their extra things that they've inherited from their great aunt. It's a place where young people who have unusual skills in this day and age, who aren't sitting home playing on their video games, to come and get appreciation from local people about the work that they do. And that's just one example. At the other extreme, I'm particularly interested in old rugs and textiles. And I met through Swag on Swayze a couple who are serious connoisseurs who just have so much stuff that they're not really interested in making money. They want to come out and share their interest in textiles and weaving with other people. I've become very good friends with them. They belong to the New England Rug Society, which is a real hoity-toity group of professional dealers. Some of the other members of that group have come up to Exeter to see what's going on because we've all started to chat about it at our Boston meetings, and they've ended up staying and going out for dinner. They love coming up here. There's actually one couple who I met through this group who have moved to Exeter. Wow. And they were introduced to Exeter through their visit that they heard word of mouth about through Swag on Swayze. These are little things, but it really is a unique event. I have a girlfriend who I used to work with when I taught in Concord, who usually doesn't want to come to Exeter to visit me. She always wants me to go in her direction. But if it's a Saturday with Swag on Swayze, she'll get in the car and be there at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning and wants to go out for lunch locally. So it's an unusual, very creative, very innovative event that Beth and her husband have come up with. And I would just like to thank you for supporting it. I know there are other people who probably didn't want to come out on a Monday night, but who are really anxious to have this continue. So thank you for your support, and know that there are real-life people out there who love Swag on Swayze and what it's done for Exeter.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. And we did get a couple of letters as well, and everybody had, I don't know if there's some I did get one or two late, so it didn't get into the packet, but we have gotten those too. Anybody else?
Hi there. I've been up here before. My name's Andrea Berzon, and I'm a resident of Exeter, and I also own a business in Exeter. And so I come from two different perspectives. One is as a business owner. Swag on Swayze has been incredibly helpful to us. I'm a business on Water Street. And I know that there's probably at least 10 other people that could be here that maybe couldn't make it or whatever, but I've spoken to them and they've all been very supportive of it. Not everyone can write letters and send emails or come to the meetings, but I think it's out there. And if you guys needed something like a petition, I would gladly start one, because I have many customers as well that tell me that Swag on Swayze is the best thing ever, and they love it as much as the farmer's market. The other perspective is, as a resident, my home happens to abut Swayze Parkway, and I can tell you that Swag on Swayze has minimal impact in comparison to other things going on at Swayze, such as beer and chili festivals and things like that, or even concerts, which, you have to listen to whether you want to or not, if you live on abutting Swayze Parkway. But Swag on Swayze is just the nicest thing. I mean, I never see trash after they come, as a resident. That's really nice to see that, to have very little impact on the park. So, thank you. I'm glad that you've come to these fees and compromises with Beth, because I think it would have been detrimental to, Beth and her husband have been so helpful in getting this off the ground, and for her to be priced out would have been really bad, I think, in my opinion. Anyway,
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Bring this down. I'm Betty Henneberry. I used to live on Swayze Parkway, had a wonderful house there, and when there were things going on in town, such as, that wasn't going on when I was there, but any of the concerts or anything in the Parkway, people would, I don't know if it was good or not, people would come to my house and stay all day and expect me to feed them and whatever. But, from the Christmas parade to Santa Claus out boating in the summertime to the concerts, it was a wonderful thing. And according to Swag here, I've never seen any mess down there. It's always picked up afterwards. And as a real estate broker, I think things like this make Exeter unique. And so I'm all for it. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Cynthia Whitcomb. I'm kind of new to the town. I have a new business down on Water Street next to, actually, Andrea right here.
And your address, I forgot to ask Betty.
180, oh,
No, go ahead, yes.
187 Water Street.
187.
I love the Swag on Swayze. I love the people that come, the people they attract. They're hardworking people. They look forward to, even though it's hard for them if they have to cancel. It's so hard for that to happen, but they still come. And there's always more people and the same people and different people. And I forget what I'm going to say, but I just really enjoy them being there, and they're hardworking people. And I know it helps our area of that end of Water Street. I love the traffic. Not necessarily they like my store, but just seeing all the people coming down and being happy. And my favorite thing is shopping there and just seeing all the same people.
Great.
And they look forward to it. And I think if that ever stopped, you'd lose those people and probably never get them back. So it keeps everybody coming as well as them. So that's my thing, so.
Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Susan Heel, and I live in Exeter. I've been here 20 years. And one of the things that the Swayze Parkway Saturday flea market does is it brings families. When you walk up the parkway, as I do, and talk to just about every vendor, you will hear a mother and a father or a grandfather saying, I used to play with that toy. I used to have that tablecloth. My mother put this on the table. It has all price points for people to be able to buy something for as little as $2 or maybe get something very expensive for hundreds of dollars. But it brings families together. Whereas if you want to shop on Main Street, it's really the people that can afford to really shop there. So the flea market brings families in, and once they're in, they bring their families up the main street. They go in and they have lunch in one of the places. They go into the Willow. They go into Andrew's shop. And they probably wouldn't come to those places if they didn't have an initial place where they could all go as a family and know that they fit in. And I really think Exeter should not just be known for PEA and the higher end echelon of life, but I think Swayze Parkway says to people, you're all welcome. We're all welcome. And I would be very sad if it wasn't there. I really, really would be sad.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll bring it back. Does anybody have anything else they would like to say? So I would look for a motion to adopt the new fees for Swayze Parkway.
Madam Chair, motion to accept the new fees as posted for Swayze Parkway.
Look, a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, that's 4-1. Okay. We will move on to the, I was supposed to close the public hearing. So
You can close it now.
we can close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Do we need to vote on that, or are we fine?
You can motion to adopt the fees within the hearing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so the next is the public hearing for the TAP program easements. This was, and I don't think we had anything in our packet, did we? Or maybe
Just the memo, the maps are here, so if anybody's here to speak to it or they want to look at the maps, we have
maybe I
them.
just didn't do I must have, okay.
They're in the last one, so they escaped. this
Right.
one, But they're
Okay.
available here tonight for anybody.
Okay. So, I would look to open the next public hearing, for the TAP program easements.
Madam Chair, I move to open the public hearing regarding the acquisition of land needed to complete the TAP sidewalk project.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay, did we have any questions on that? We have gone over that. Was there a motion on?
We vote next meeting.
Oh, is it 3,
2 hearings.
This is this is just
That's
the
the second
second.
hearing. You'll have one more.
and then you vote on it next time?
Right.
Okay, so I open the public hearing. Are there anybody that would like to speak to it? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. I look for a motion to close the
Madam Chair, I
public
move
hearing.
to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed, I should have said. Okay, we'll move on to tax abatements, or regular business, tax abatements, veterans credits, and exemptions.
This is where I have to blow this up. Enlarge, I should say.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I move to approve a veteran's credit in the amount of $1,000 for MAP 71, Lot 72.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
I move to approve veterans credits in the amount of $500 respectively for MAP 86, Lot 65, and MAP 73, Lot 136.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye. I got that aye.
Sorry.
Madam Chair, I move to approve elderly exemptions in the amount of $183,751 for the following: MAP 104, Lot 79, Unit 516, and MAP 68, Lot 6, Unit 814, respectively.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
I move to approve elderly exemptions in the amount of $152,251 for the following: MAP 104, Lot 79, Unit 9, and MAP 63, Lot 188, respectively.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
I move an elderly exemption in the amount of $236,251 for MAP 73, Lot 136.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
I move a disability exemption in the amount of $125,000 for MAP 104, Lot 35.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
I move an abatement in the amount of $1,107.65 for MAP 81, Lot 53.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
I move an abatement for Lot 68, I'm sorry, MAP 68, Lot 6, Unit 224, in the amount of $123.33.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
And I move an abatement for MAP 72, Lot 17, Unit 5, in the amount of $504.96.
All those in, sorry, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Okay, we move on to, we don't have any permits and approvals. Town managers report.
Okay. Just a couple of things. One is that the town reports did come in last Friday, and they are available at the town office for people. Please come in and pick one up if you haven't already. They're usually a hot commodity, so you can do that. And then we did have a meeting last week on the NIPD's permit with a joint meeting with Newmarket and some representatives from the DPWs of both entities and some legal representation. So we did get word that as a result of the public hearing in Portsmouth the other night, that the EPA has already extended the comments period out into April. So that was really good news. It gives us a bit more time to get our comments together in a coherent way and present them to you and so forth. So we're glad for that. And then just on the heels of that, we do have another meeting on this issue, the permit, tomorrow up in Rochester, and that's with the staffs of both senators and also Congressman Pappas as well. So they should be there to listen to the communities, and I'll be really interested to listen to what the others have to say regarding the latest on this. And one other thing, we did meet last week on the emergency operations plan, so we're continuing to update that. And I know the town moderator couldn't be here tonight because he's at Riverwoods helping with the warrant, and almost feel like he got thrown to the wolves a little bit, but he sends his regards, and just for everybody next week with the election coming up, obviously just the rules of the road as far as the election and maintaining the proper distance from the polls and so forth, and he'll be there to regulate that, plus just the electioneering rules and things like that, so if people can be conscious of that. And any questions, let him know.
Do we have stickers?
That's the same thing.
So the answer to that question is an unequivocal yes. We do have stickers. And I will say that I want to give Pam a lot of kudos because she has reached out to the high school. And we are hoping to have students that are going to be on site that day to help with that whole
great.
process.
Even better.
So
That's great.
Yeah, we have an in with the senior class, and so we'll see how many we can get out to help us out with that. But short answer is yes, we do. We'll have quite a few of them.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That was it, unless there were questions of me.
Select Board Committee reports. Julie, do you have anything?
No, I've been in Concord. Although I do want to say that the bill that I submitted for reversing the definition of contracts in a default budget is coming out of my committee tomorrow. And I think it'll go.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and then
Try to kill me.
I forget what we're voting on tomorrow. Never mind, I'll let you know what's happening Thursday. Sorry. That's it.
A wonderful end of the month. The planning board meeting got canceled. Facilities meeting got canceled, but I have sustainability tomorrow.
Great. I did not attend any, but I am attending the Communications Committee tomorrow morning.
I also have nothing to report.
Oh, slow week.
Slow week.
I don't think, I have E911 tomorrow. That'll be my final E911. I was able to attend this morning's swearing in of the 2 new police officers, which was kind of exciting. It's always nice when I can fit that in. I can't always do it, but I know we all do when we can, so that was quite fun. And I just wanted to thank everyone. This is my last meeting, so I took one quick second just to thank people that aren't even here, former board members, in particular Don Clement, who was really quite a good mentor to me in my first couple of years, and he taught me a lot. You all have, everyone. I've learned from every one of the members, and I just want to thank Alex Akess is not here, but I want to thank the Fourth Estate for all the times that they called and got information from us, and you'll all be doing this someday. And I have enjoyed everyone in the staff. It's been great getting to know everyone in this town that run this town, and we have a fabulous town, we do. And that's probably why I'm often critical. I may come across like I'm critical of it, but that's just because I know how good they are. We just want to make them better. And I hope, the one last thing is a goal that we had for a couple of years, and maybe someone will pick up the mantle on conflict of interest. I know it's a challenging type of thing to do, but I know it could be done at some point. It just probably needs a little more work, and maybe someone else can pick that up. But again, I want to thank everyone who ever voted for me, and even if you didn't vote for me, I hope I've served you well, and I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
On that note, we do have some token of appreciation for our 2 retiring board members.
But don't say retiring.
That's exactly what's happened. You've left office. And so we just wanted to really recognize both of your contributions to this town, to moving our town forward, to moving our board forward, to open and transparent government. And thank you both so much for your service to this town.
Oh, thanks.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yay.
And I would like to say thank you also as leaving me as a senior statesman in a couple of different ways. But I really have appreciated working with you too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, my gosh.
Man,
Thank you. That is so nice.
Our certificate of recognition.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Oh, good. I
name
Bring it
etched on a
in.
plaque.
bring it to Hannaford. It's too nice for Hannaford. I'll bring it north, don't worry. Well, thank you. And with that too, I would look to move into a non-public session, actually, under 31A C. Would somebody like to move that?
What is that for? What
It
is
is
the-
for a, what do it,
93 season.
31.
31:8.
Yeah.
91A3 2C.
Can't
91, okay. Madam Chair, I move
I'll
to
second.
enter a non-public session under 91A3. What did you say? 91A3C 2C.
Second.
Oh, 2C, okay.
Yeah.
All those in
many
favor?
Subparagraphs down.
We have to do the roll call.
Do it by
Oh,
roll.
thank you, please.
Ms. Sermon?
Aye.
Ms. Cowan?
Aye.
Madam Chair?
Aye.
Aye.
Ms. Gilman?
Aye.
Okay,
Whack the
with
hammer.
that, thank you.